When I walked into my birthday gathering, the room froze mid-breath. Laughter stopped, glasses hung in the air, even the jazz tune on the speaker hiccuped and died. Every head turned toward me, and to the bruise blooming beneath my left eye like spilled wine on linen. My name is Eleanor Hart, and I turned 72 that night in Cleveland, Ohio. What should have been a night of celebration became the hour I saw my son for who he truly was, and the moment I decided not to be broken by the people who shared my blood. The chandelier cast light over every polished plank Walter and I sanded by hand. My husband's been gone 4 years now, heart failure, sudden and final. We built this home across 50 years of life together, leaky roofs, burnt pies, laughter over late-night coffee. We called it the Heart House because we poured our hearts into every inch. At the center of the room stood my son, Daniel, tall and handsome in his gray sport coat. Beside him, his wife, Kayla, hair slicked into a perfect ponytail, lips glossed sharp enough to cut, and a diamond ring that caught every light in the room. Her hand gripped his arm like a leash. Someone near the punch bowl whispered, "What happened to her face?" The words rolled through the room like marbles on wood. I didn't answer. I just stood tall. Daniel's voice sliced through the hush, calm and casual. Kayla taught her a little respect. For a second, the air itself seemed to shatter. I felt every heartbeat in my body. Heat crawled up my neck like fire under skin. Then I heard my brother Tom's voice, steady, steel-edged. "Say that again, Danny, to your mother." Daniel's jaw twitched. Kayla's smile faltered, but her tone dripped sugar. "Don't twist his words, Tom. You know how easily things get exaggerated." Silence spread heavy as thunderclouds, and in that silence, I realized something. This bruise wasn't the real wound. It was only the proof of a deeper betrayal. What I carried wasn't pain on the surface, but the slow erosion of love twisted into obedience. You can't understand that bruise until you know how it started, because betrayal doesn't storm through the door. It slips in softly and takes root where trust once lived. It began 4 years ago, when Walter's chair stayed empty at breakfast. The morning after his funeral, I brewed 2 cups of coffee out of habit. His mug sat untouched, steam rising like a ghost. His sweater was still draped over the armchair, his glasses on the table beside the unfinished crossword. The house felt hollow. That evening, Daniel held my hand. "Mom, I'll stay with you for a while," he said. His voice reminded me of his father's, gentle, sure. And for a while, it worked. We had tea on the porch, watched old westerns, shared memories that made us laugh through tears. I thought grief had drawn us closer. Then came Kayla. She walked into our lives one spring afternoon, tall and polished, with a voice that could melt butter and freeze your spine at the same time. "Mrs. Hart," she said, hugging me with cold arms, "it's such a privilege to meet the woman who raised such a wonderful man." Her smile was perfect, too perfect. She admired the house, the china, even the scar on the old dining table from the year we dropped a pie straight from the oven. "So much potential," she said. "A little update, some brighter colors, make it more modern." Daniel looked at her like she'd hung the moon. I smiled politely, but something deep in my chest tightened. At first, it was harmless. Throw pillows, new curtains. Then my lavender candles disappeared, replaced by her imported diffusers. Family photos came down to let the walls breathe. Up went black and white art prints, soulless and cold. When I asked about the photos, Kayla smiled. "Minimalism, Mrs. Hart. It helps keep the mind clear." Minimalism. I'd soon learn that was her pretty word for control. Daniel told me to try, so I did. But love without respect isn't love. It's submission disguised as peace. You can't understand that bruise until you know how it started, because betrayal doesn't storm through the door. It slips in softly and takes root where trust once lived. It began 4 years ago, when Walter's chair stayed empty at breakfast. The morning after his funeral, I brewed 2 cups of coffee out of habit. His mug sat untouched, steam rising like a ghost. His sweater was still draped over the armchair, his glasses on the table beside the unfinished crossword. The house felt hollow. That evening, Daniel held my hand. "Mom, I'll stay with you for a while," he said. His voice reminded me of his father's, gentle, sure. And for a while, it worked. We had tea on the porch, watched old westerns, shared memories that made us laugh through tears. I thought grief had drawn us closer. Then came Kayla. She walked into our lives one spring afternoon, tall and polished, with a voice that could melt butter and freeze your spine at the same time. "Mrs. Hart," she said, hugging me with cold arms. "It's such a privilege to meet the woman who raised such a wonderful man." Her smile was perfect. Too perfect. She admired the house, the china, even the scar on the old dining table from the year we dropped a pie straight from the oven. "So much potential," she said. "A little update, some brighter colors. Make it more modern." Daniel looked at her like she'd hung the moon. I smiled politely, but something deep in my chest tightened. At first, it was harmless. Throw pillows, new curtains. Then my lavender candles disappeared, replaced by her imported diffusers. Family photos came down to let the walls breathe. Up went black and white art prints, soulless and cold. When I asked about the photos, Kayla smiled. "Minimalism, Mrs. Hart. It helps keep the mind clear." Minimalism. I'd soon learn that was her pretty word for control. Daniel told me to try, so I did. But love without respect isn't love. It's submission disguised as peace. 2 days before my birthday, I found Kayla in my bedroom, holding my jewelry box, Walter's gift to me on our 25th anniversary. When I asked what she was doing, she said, "Just thinking how much we could get for this old stuff. It's time you stopped living in the past." Her words struck harder than her shove. I stumbled, hit the nightstand, and the bruise bloomed. That night, I made a promise to walk into that party unhidden, because shame thrives in silence, and I wasn't going to hide anymore. The morning after the incident, I woke with a heaviness that didn't come from age, but from the bruise stretching along my cheek. It throbbed in slow waves, but the pain wasn't sharp. It was the kind that settles, the kind you get when betrayal has already done its worst. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back, not because of the bruise, but because of what I had allowed under my own roof. Downstairs, I could hear Kayla humming. Her voice drifted through the house like a reminder that she was comfortable here, too comfortable. When I reached the kitchen, she stood by the counter arranging flowers in one of my good vases, white lilies. Walter used to wrinkle his nose at them. "Smells like a funeral," he'd say. Maybe that was the point. She looked up, smiling. "Good morning, Mrs. Hart. You really must watch your step. These old houses can be tricky." Her eyes flicked to my bruise, then away, as if it were an inconvenience. I poured myself coffee. My hands shook, but she didn't notice. Or maybe she enjoyed it. "Daniel and I were talking," she continued, stirring her tea. "We think it may be time you considered moving somewhere more suitable, a senior residence, with activities, friends, less responsibility." Less responsibility? That was her delicate way of saying, get out. I sipped my coffee slowly. This house doesn't burden me. Her smile tightened. Change can be good. Not this kind. When she left the room, I sat at the table and breathed deeply, trying to steady myself. I wasn't ready to tell Daniel what had happened, not yet, but I did call my brother Tom. I told him I needed him at the party early. He could hear something in my voice, even though I tried to sound steady. He promised he'd be there. The hours before the party were slow and strange. Kayla floated through the house like she owned it. She replaced my lace tablecloth with a shiny silver runner, moved the photos I'd put back on the staircase into a storage bin, and taped the lid shut. She adjusted the lights, the chairs, even the music playlist. It didn't feel like my birthday. It didn't feel like my home. By evening, guests had begun to arrive. Old neighbors, church friends, some of Daniel's colleagues. Everyone came with warm smiles, but beneath those smiles was something else. Curiosity, maybe concern. People notice when an old woman looks tired in the wrong way. Daniel arrived last, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. He kissed my cheek carefully. I could feel him avoiding the bruise. "Happy birthday, Mom." "Thank you," I whispered. Behind him, Kayla followed with her polished smile. "Everyone is so excited to celebrate you," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "We want tonight to be special." Special? Somehow, the word felt like a warning. When the cake came out and the candles flickered, I made my wish. Not for the past, not for youth. I wished for clarity, for truth to come forward, no matter how painful. And as if the universe had been waiting for that moment, the front door opened. A familiar voice carried through the room. "Evening, Eleanor. I hope I'm not too late." Mark Benson stepped inside, Walter's old friend and our family attorney, holding a leather folder under his arm. Kayla stiffened. Mark's expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Before we go any further, there's something important I need to share." The room went silent again, and I felt my heart begin to steady because I knew this was the beginning of the truth I had wished for. Every whisper stopped when Mark Benson entered. The laughter that had been stitched together with forced cheer fell apart at the seams. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, steady, loud, and unbothered by human shame. Kayla stood near the fireplace, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wineglass. Daniel shifted beside her, confused but trying to appear calm. The guests looked from one face to another, waiting for someone to explain why the family lawyer had just interrupted a birthday party. Mark greeted a few people politely, then looked straight at me. "Eleanor," he said, "I'm sorry to intrude on your evening, but this couldn't wait." My heart pounded, though I didn't show it. "Go ahead, Mark," I said quietly. "You're always welcome here." He nodded and opened the brown folder in his hands. Before Walter passed, he filed an amendment to his will. He wanted to make sure you would never be forced, tricked, or coerced into leaving your home. Kayla's smile froze in place. I saw her throat move as she swallowed hard. Mark continued, calm and steady. He included a clause. If at any point Eleanor Hart is mistreated, manipulated, or pressured to vacate her home, by family or otherwise, the entire estate, including property and accounts, will be transferred to charity. No heir receives a penny. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Someone dropped a plate. Kayla's face went pale. Daniel blinked, stunned. "That can't be right," he said, his voice unsteady. "Dad said—" Mark raised a hand gently. "I have the signed documents here, Daniel. Your father filed them himself. The goal was simple, to make sure no one could take this house from your mother, not through charm, nor pressure, nor deceit." Kayla laughed softly, but it was brittle and sharp. "This is ridiculous. Of course no one is trying to take anything. We were simply talking about her comfort. You know how stubborn she can be." Tom stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the doorway. "Funny thing," he said, his voice low. "Comfort doesn't usually come with bruises." The room went dead silent again. Kayla's eyes darted toward Daniel. "You're going to believe that? She fell. She's getting older." Mark cleared his throat and laid another paper on the table. 2 weeks ago, someone requested an appraisal of this property under the name K. Lawson. The request came from your email address, Mrs. Lawson. She froze. "That's a lie." "I also have call records showing inquiries about declaring Eleanor Hart mentally unfit to manage her estate," Mark said evenly, "all traced to the same number." Kayla's mouth opened, but no words came out. Daniel stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. "Kayla," he said softly, "tell me that's not true." Her voice trembled. "Daniel, listen to me. I did it for us. You said yourself this house was too much for her. I was trying to make things easier." Tom's voice cut through her excuses. "You were trying to steal what wasn't yours." Kayla snapped, her tone cracking. "Oh, please. She's been manipulating you your whole life, Daniel. She plays the helpless widow so you'll feel guilty enough to keep her comfortable." Daniel's hands fell to his sides. His shoulders slumped as he shook his head slowly. "You hit her, Kayla. You lied about her. You tried to take her home." She laughed again, but her voice broke halfway through. "You think she loves you? She just wants control. She's an old woman clinging to her past." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the boy I used to know flicker back through his eyes. "No," he said softly, "she's the only person who's ever truly loved me." Kayla's expression collapsed into something bitter and hollow. "You're pathetic," she hissed. And with that, she dropped her glass on the floor, grabbed her purse, and stormed out. The door slammed behind her like thunder. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Mark turned to me. "Eleanor, you're safe. Walter made sure of it. No one can touch your home now." I nodded, though my chest felt heavy. Safe didn't mean healed. Not yet. Daniel stood frozen by the table, staring at the shattered glass. "Mom," he said finally, his voice breaking, "I don't know how I let it come to this." I wanted to comfort him. I wanted to tell him it wasn't too late. But at that moment, forgiveness still felt like a foreign language. The front door slammed behind Kayla, but her presence lingered like the sour smell of cheap perfume. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was stunned. Guests stood still, eyes darting between me and Daniel, unsure whether to leave or stay. Even the music had stopped. Only the slow drip of spilled wine from the broken glass filled the air. Tom finally broke the quiet. "Folks, maybe we should give them some space." His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight with anger. Within minutes, the crowd began to thin. People murmured awkward goodbyes, shuffling toward the exit, pretending not to look at my bruise or the tears threatening to spill from my son's eyes. When the last car pulled away, only the three of us remained: Tom, Daniel, and me. Mark Benson closed his folder and turned to me. "Eleanor, everything is legally secure. No one, not even Daniel, can transfer ownership without your consent. Walter made sure this house will remain yours until you choose otherwise." I nodded. "Thank you, Mark. You've done more than you know." He gave me a kind smile, patted my shoulder, and quietly left. Tom followed him out to see him off, leaving Daniel standing near the kitchen doorway, looking small for the first time in his life. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "I thought I was protecting her, Mom. I thought I was doing the right thing." I didn't answer immediately. I studied him, this grown man who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, whose laughter once filled this house. Now, he looked like a stranger trying to find a way back home. "She told me you were lonely," he said, his voice cracking, "that you needed structure, that the house was too much for you. I believed her." I exhaled slowly. "Believing isn't the problem, Daniel. It's what we choose to ignore when the truth whispers louder than the lie." He looked up, shame swimming in his eyes. "I let her change everything. The house, the photos, even how I spoke to you. I don't know who I became." "You became what she needed," I said gently, "not what you were raised to be." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I wanted to forgive him right there, but forgiveness isn't a door you just open. It's a lock that takes time to turn. Tom came back inside, wiping his hands on his coat. "You don't owe anyone explanations, Elle," he said firmly. "Let that boy figure himself out somewhere else for a while." Daniel's head dropped. "He's right," I said quietly. "You need space, and so do I." He swallowed hard. "Do you want me to leave tonight?" "Yes," I said. My voice trembled, but it was steady enough. "Take a few things and go stay with Tom or one of your friends. I need quiet." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he nodded, turned toward the hallway, and disappeared upstairs. I heard drawers opening, the rustle of clothes, the click of a suitcase. When he came back down, his eyes were red. He stood at the door and whispered, "I can't lose you too." I met his gaze, and though my heart ached, I said the only truth that fit. You already did. But maybe one day we'll find each other again. He nodded once, then left. The door clicked shut, soft but final. The house fell still. No laughter, no perfume, no clinking dishes. Just silence, the kind that settles instead of suffocates. I walked through every room that night, touching the furniture, the pictures, the walls Walter built. The bruises on my face were still tender, but inside me, something was healing. When I reached the porch, the cool night air wrapped around me. The moon hung low, and the roses in the garden swayed gently in the wind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel fear. I felt ownership, not just of the house, but of myself. I whispered into the night, "You didn't fail, Walter. You protected me, even from the ones I love." And for the first time since he passed, I felt like he heard me. The morning light that followed felt different. It wasn't warm or cheerful. It was honest. I woke up to a quiet house, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. Just peace, stretched across the walls like sunlight after rain. Tom had stayed the night on the couch, insisting he wouldn't leave me alone. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already brewing coffee. The smell filled the air, rich and familiar. For a moment, I remembered Walter standing in that same spot, humming off-key while he burned toast. "Morning, Elle," Tom said gently. "You sleep any?" "A little," I replied, but it was the kind of sleep that feels like starting over. He smiled faintly. "That's a good start." We sat at the table in silence for a while. Then he said, "You should think about changing the locks, and maybe call someone to fix that broken drawer upstairs. Make this place yours again." I nodded, tracing my finger along the rim of my mug. "I will. It's time." After he left that afternoon, I started reclaiming the house one corner at a time. The metallic tablecloth Kayla bought went straight into the trash. I replaced it with the old lace one Walter loved, the one with a tiny coffee stain near the edge. I unpacked the family photos from the storage bin, wiping each frame carefully before placing them back on the staircase where they belonged. Each picture felt like a heartbeat returning to the house. I opened the windows wide. The air smelled like roses again. I even found my lavender candles hidden behind boxes in the pantry. I lit one and watched the soft smoke rise, carrying something heavy away with it. That night, as I sat in the living room reading one of Walter's old gardening journals, the phone rang. I hesitated before answering. "Mom," Daniel's voice said. It was quiet, careful. "Please don't hang up." My heart skipped. "I'm listening," I said. I hired a private investigator," he continued. "I needed to know the truth about Kayla." I didn't say a word. "She's done this before," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Twice, both times to older men who owned property. She'd marry them, gain access to their finances, drain everything, then leave. She's in debt, Mom, deep debt." I closed my eyes. My heart ached. Not for her, but for him. "She never loved me," he whispered. "She loved what I had, what you had." There was silence for a long time. Then I said softly, "You can't fix what's already been broken, son, but you can learn from it. You can choose to be better." He sniffled. "I've started therapy. I want to understand why I let it happen, why I believed her." For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of pride. "That's a good thing, Daniel. Healing begins with understanding." He sighed. "I'll call you again soon, I promise." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a while. The moonlight spilled across the floor, and I could almost feel Walter's presence again. Steady, patient, the kind of presence that reminded me of all the nights we fought through storms and found laughter anyway. In the weeks that followed, Daniel called more often. At first, our conversations were awkward, full of pauses and small talk, but gradually, we found rhythm again. We spoke about the weather, the roses, the new fence I had fixed. He told me his counselor called what Kayla did gaslighting. She made me doubt my own memory, he said, made me believe that love meant obedience. That's not love, Daniel, I told him softly. Love doesn't demand silence. He paused. You're right. I'm learning that now. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the beginning of something close to it, an open door, even if he still stood on the porch. Some nights, I'd sit by the window and listen to the wind moving through the trees, whispering in that soft, familiar way Walter's voice once did. And I'd think to myself, maybe this is what surviving looks like. Not revenge, not triumph, just stillness, and the quiet strength to keep the light on even after the storm has passed. Months rolled by, and life began to find its rhythm again. The Hart house no longer echoed with Kayla's sharp heels or the clatter of her false laughter. Instead, it hummed with simple sounds: the creak of floorboards, the hum of my old fridge, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock Walter bought at a yard sale 50 years ago. One Saturday morning, I stepped into the garden, gloves in hand, determined to bring it back to life. The roses had suffered under Kayla's neglect. She once called them old-fashioned clutter. I remember smiling bitterly at that thought while trimming away the dry stems. Those roses had seen more honesty than she ever did. As I worked, a voice called from the gate. "Mrs. Hart?" I turned, squinting against the sunlight. A young woman stood there, holding a basket of muffins. She had soft brown hair and a nervous smile. "I'm Emily Rhodes," she said. "I just moved in next door. My grandmother used to talk about you, said you make the best apple pies in the neighborhood." I chuckled softly. She must have been kind with her words. "Come on in." We sat on the porch, sharing coffee and muffins. Emily talked about her job at the local library, her love for gardening, and her struggle to keep succulents alive. She laughed easily, the kind of laugh that doesn't hide anything. For the first time in years, I felt genuine warmth from someone new. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a regular visitor. She'd drop by after work to water the plants with me or bring over soup on rainy evenings. She reminded me of the world outside loss, young, hopeful, untouched by bitterness. Then, one afternoon in spring, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. My heart tightened. Daniel stepped out, holding a bouquet of tulips, Walter's favorite. He looked healthier, calmer, his shoulders no longer slumped under invisible weight. "Hey, Mom," he said, walking up the path. "Hey, stranger," I replied with a smile that surprised even me. "I wanted you to meet someone," he said, turning toward the car. And there she was, Emily, smiling shyly. "Wait," I laughed softly. "This Emily?" She blushed, guilty. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. "We've been seeing each other for a few months. I wanted to wait until it felt right." I looked between them. Emily's eyes held no pretense, no calculation, just kindness. "You two come inside," I said, my voice softer than I expected. Over lunch, Emily asked about Walter's garden and the old photos on the wall. She never once mentioned money, inheritance, or property, just stories. She listened, really listened, as if she was trying to understand the heart of our family instead of what we owned. After they left, I sat alone on the porch, the air thick with evening jasmine. For the first time since everything fell apart, I didn't feel alone. The wind moved through the trees in that slow, familiar rhythm Walter used to whistle. A few weeks later, Daniel called again. "Mom," he said, voice trembling, "I asked Emily to marry me." I felt tears rise, but they weren't from pain this time. "Did she say yes?" "She did," he said, laughing softly, "but she asked for one thing before we plan anything." "What's that?" I asked. "She wants a prenup," he said. "She said she doesn't want a penny that isn't hers. She said love should never depend on ownership." My chest tightened, but this time it was pride. "You have my blessing, son," I whispered. "All I ever wanted was for you to find someone who values love more than control." There was silence on the line, the kind filled with emotion that doesn't need words. Then Daniel said quietly, "I think I finally have." When we hung up, I looked out at the roses swaying under the moonlight. For once, the past didn't hurt. It just rested quietly beside me, a reminder that healing doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives like spring, quietly after a long winter. The wedding took place in late summer, under an open sky by the Cuyahoga River. The garden was filled with soft music, laughter, and the faint smell of wildflowers drifting with the breeze. It was small, maybe 40 people in total, but it felt like the world had shown up. Daniel stood beneath an arch of white roses, looking nothing like the man who once defended cruelty. His eyes were clear, his shoulders steady. When Emily walked down the aisle, her simple white dress shimmered under the sunlight like something pure, untouched by the chaos of the past. As I watched them exchange vows, my throat tightened. I thought about how close I came to losing my son, not to death, but to manipulation, to greed disguised as love. And now, here he was, vowing not to repeat the mistakes that nearly destroyed us. When he said, "I've learned that love without respect isn't love at all," the guests went silent. Every word carried the weight of what we had lived through. He glanced toward me as he continued, "And family without honesty isn't family, it's a cage." The crowd clapped softly. Emily's eyes glistened, her hands trembling slightly as she whispered her vows back. "I don't want what you have. I just want to build something with you," she said. Simple words, but they cut through me like light through fog. After the ceremony, they shared their first dance to an old Louis Armstrong song, the same song Walter and I danced to at our wedding in 1969. The sound flowed through the air, soft and steady. I could almost feel Walter beside me, his hand on my shoulder, whispering, "See, it all came full circle." When the song ended, Daniel walked over and extended his hand. "Dance with me, Mom." I hesitated. "Oh, I'm too old for that." He smiled gently. "You're not too old for forgiveness." Those words, they broke something open in me. So I stood, he took my hand, and we danced slowly under the string lights. My cheek rested against his shoulder, and for a moment, I was no longer the woman with the bruise, or the widow fighting to keep her home. I was just a mother with her son again. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all of it." "I know," I said softly, "but you're trying, and that's enough." When the night ended, we stood by the river watching lanterns float away across the water, tiny specks of light carrying prayers into the dark. Emily slipped her hand into mine and said, "He talks about you every day. You're his hero, you know." I smiled faintly. "Heroes make mistakes too." "Maybe," she said, "but not all of them get up again the way you did." The next morning, the newlyweds left for their honeymoon in Maine. As their car disappeared down the road, I stood at the gate, my hand resting on the fence Walter built with his own hands. The air smelled like roses and salt, and for once, my heart was still. That afternoon, I walked through the house, every room alive again. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the stories, it all felt like a new chapter beginning. I ran my hand along the wooden banister, the same one I once clutched for balance after Kayla's shove. The scar on the edge was still there, faint but real. I decided to leave it that way. Some scars aren't meant to be sanded down. They're proof that you survived. Later, as I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky gold, I whispered softly, "We made it, Walter. The house stood, and so did I." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by what was lost. I felt grateful for what remained, truth, peace, and the quiet strength that comes after the storm. 2 months after the wedding, the house finally settled into a peace that felt earned, not borrowed, not forced, just quiet and right. The kind of peace that lives in old wood, soft light, and laughter that doesn't try too hard. Daniel and Emily visited every Sunday afternoon. They'd bring groceries, sit on the porch, and help me tend to the garden. Sometimes we didn't even talk much. We just existed in the same space, the way family is supposed to, without fear, without control. One Sunday, as we were pulling weeds near the roses, Daniel said, "Mom, I want to make sure you're never alone again. I've been thinking, maybe we can add a small guest house in the back. You can rent it out or use it when you need help." I smiled, brushing soil from my hands. "You know, your father talked about building one years ago, said he'd use it as his workshop. Maybe it's time to finish what he started." Emily grinned. Then it's settled. We'll help you design it. The following weeks passed in quiet joy. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of continuity, a thread connecting what was and what could still be. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It was a place of rebuilding. I started joining a small reading group at the library where Emily worked. It was mostly widows and retirees, women like me who had lived long enough to see life's cruel edges and still found the courage to keep going. We shared stories, some funny, some heartbreaking. When it was my turn, I told them a little about my own journey. Not every detail, but enough to let them see what betrayal can do and what healing can become. One woman with silver hair and tired eyes said, "You don't sound bitter, Eleanor. How did you manage that?" I smiled. Because bitterness is a prison that punishes the wrong person. I just wanted my peace back. She nodded slowly, and I knew she understood. That night, I came home to the faint hum of crickets outside and the scent of the roses blooming again. The air was cool, the house still. I stood in the living room, looking at the photo wall. Walter holding Daniel as a baby, our first Christmas, the day we finished painting the porch. Every picture had once been a wound when I looked at it, but now they were reminders of endurance. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in Walter's old armchair, the one Kayla once tried to throw out. The fabric was frayed, but it still felt like home. I thought about everything that had happened, how betrayal came dressed as love, how lies disguise themselves as care, and how strength sometimes means simply standing up after the world has knocked you down. And in that moment, I realized something simple yet profound. Revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your peace, your laughter, your dignity. That's the quiet kind of revenge that lasts. Later, Daniel called. "Mom," he said, "I know I can't erase what happened, but thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "You're my son. Giving up on you was never an option. I just had to wait until you remembered who you were." When I hung up, I whispered into the quiet, "We're all right now, Walter." Outside, the wind moved gently through the garden. The roses swayed like they were listening. And as I turned off the lamp, I knew the storm had finally passed. The house stood tall, and so did I. To everyone watching my story tonight, betrayal can wound deep, but healing runs deeper. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge, it's peace. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Do you believe forgiveness can truly heal betrayal? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mabel's Stories for more true-to-life tales about love, loss, and the quiet power of survival.